Hello, Muslim friends in the world. The sky over Los Angeles turned red, not from sunset, but from rage. In front of City Hall, the roar of thousands echoed like an unstoppable storm. Posters waved high, whistles blew, shouts rang out, and the pounding of drums created a rhythm of resistance. They didn't come for selfies, nor for a party. They came to say, "Enough! We refuse to die for a war that isn't ours." That morning, CNN broadcasted a breaking news alert. President Trump declares full military support for Israel in its open conflict with Iran. Within hours, thousands began flooding the streets. There was no central command, no big organization behind it, just collective anger, ignited in every home, campus, office, and street. A mother stood at the front line, clutching a photo of her 2 children. On her poster it read, "I gave birth to them to live, not to become martyrs of foreign policy." On the other side, an Iraq War veteran, tattooed, bearded, wearing a worn leather jacket, shouted into the camera, "You want us to send our kids back to the Middle East? Enough! You've already killed enough of us." From New York to San Francisco, from Denver to Atlanta, one phrase dominated the air: "No more blood for politics." On social media, hashtags like #NotOurWar, #AmericansForPeace, and #StopTheGameMeat began trending. But this was more than just hashtags. This was the birth of a new wave, a people rising without weapons. Beneath the legendary bridge, a group of students burned a cardboard model of a fighter jet. They sang songs of freedom, accompanied by an acoustic guitar and the sound of takbir echoing from the loudspeakers of a Muslim community group that had joined the protest. "This isn't about religion. It's about humanity," said Marcus, a young black man who had just lost his cousin in military service. A clash almost broke out when a group of protesters blocked the building's entrance. But then, a small miracle happened. A police officer laid down his baton. He stood beside the demonstrators, raised his hand, and said, "I have children too. I don't want them dying in a war they never chose." Cheers erupted. Media cameras captured the moment. The world watched. The world wondered, is this the beginning of an American people's revolution? One thing is certain: on that day, for the first time in a long time, the American people stood not to defend power, but to defend human life. And they are not stopping anytime soon. June 14th, 2025, will not be remembered as just another holiday, but as the day when millions of Americans rose up against a war narrative cloaked in false patriotism. The activists gave it a name: No King's Day, the day without a king. A day when the people declared, "We do not bow to rulers who trade lives for global influence." In the cold of dawn, the subways were packed with people carrying posters. Some still wore raincoats, others had faces full of resolve. At Times Square station, they gathered in silence. No speeches, no chants, just stillness as protest. At 6 o'clock, they knelt together, in silence. 1 minute, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. We kneel for lives that had no choice. Gaza, Tehran, Tel Aviv, Chicago, every life matters. A voice from Columbia University's student loudspeaker. In the Capitol, barricades were raised, roads blocked, the White House heavily guarded. But the crowd kept coming, like a flood, unstoppable. From war veterans to elementary school children, from Buddhist monks to pastors and imams, they stood shoulder to shoulder. A giant banner was raised, one that caught the attention of the entire world. This is not our war. This is not our enemy. This is not our future. In front of City Hall, the protest became a stage for resistance art. Hip-hop music played, poems were read. A morning dance by Native American groups moved the crowd. And then, something unexpected. A 16-year-old Muslim teenager climbed onto a car and led a fiery speech. "You're afraid your kids will be drafted? We've grown up in the shadow of war every single day. But today, we are one family, refusing to be cannon fodder." Applause erupted. Many wept. Even the security personnel, initially cold and distant, stood and clapped. It wasn't just the big cities. In over 2,100 towns and districts, from rural Iowa to coastal Maine, people poured out of their homes, standing together. Churches rang their bells. Mosques broadcast the advent of peace. Temples burned incense for souls lost in previous wars. This wasn't just a protest. It was a moral uprising. We're not traitors. We are the ones trying to save this nation from destruction. Nora Lightfoot, mother of two, Montana. Camera with flash, the world was stunned. Drones from BBC, Al Jazeera, and Japan's NHK captured an ocean of people standing still, forming one powerful message: no more war. From the sky, it looked like the greatest humanitarian festival in modern American history. End of Chapter 2. President Trump tried to downplay it, calling it a minor disturbance. But viral footage told a different story. This wasn't chaos. It was a revolution of consciousness. And that day marked a turning point. The day the American people stopped being silent. The day they said, "We are not ruled by kings. We are the people, and we choose life." The White House looked majestic as usual. Its pillars stood tall. Its windows gleamed pristine white. But inside, fear began creeping along the walls of power. No more casual chatter among advisors. No more laughter echoing in the corridors of authority. Only hurried footsteps and intelligence reports that could no longer be ignored. Protests have spread to 49 states. Several government agencies have been blockaded. Public opinion opposing military intervention in the Middle East has reached 73%. NSA report to the emergency briefing room. President Trump stood by the window, looking out, not at the White House grounds, but at the large monitor displaying protests from all across the country. Is this just an ordinary protest? No, sir. This is ideological resistance. The people reject war. Not only Iran, they're questioning the very foundation of U.S. foreign policy. Thousands gathered in Lafayette Park. They sang an old Vietnam War protest song revived. Musical notes, "Where have all the young men gone? Gone to war, everyone." A pastor stood on the steps with a megaphone and shouted, "This government isn't deaf. They're just pretending. Let's make sure they can't pretend anymore." Usually, the narrative belongs to the government. But this time, it doesn't. Mainstream media like The Guardian, Washington Post, even Fox News, usually pro-military, began to waver. They couldn't deny the reality. Soldiers refused to be sent to Iran. Students burned draft cards. Veterans exposed lies of previous wars. If the people no longer believe war is for their security, then the government has lost its moral mandate. Professor Linda Harrington, international relations expert. The opposition smelled blood. Progressive senators like Mariah Owens from Oregon took the podium and slammed the table. How many American children must die before we realize? This isn't about national security, it's about international ego. Cheers erupted. Even some previously silent Republican senators began to hesitate. Social media became the main battleground. People uploaded short videos, testimonies, even military spending versus education budgets. One viral video showed elementary school kids in Detroit using plastic buckets as chairs due to budget cuts, with the caption, "But we can send $70 million jets to Israel?" That video was watched 42 million times in 2 days. Trump tried to calm the public with a national address. "We only want to protect our allies. "We will not go to war unless forced." But the people's voices were too loud to silence. A teenager responded on TikTok, "If war is always forced, why are the people always the victims? The rulers are used to controlling discourse, shaping opinion, and manufacturing enemies. But now they face a people who are smarter, more connected, and braver than ever before. Elites talk strategy, the people talk life. And for the first time in modern American history, the narrative of power is forced to listen to the cries from the streets." No one expected that amid the most massive protests in modern American history, the most misunderstood religion would emerge as a bridge of hope. On city streets, public squares, and in the hearts of people who had once been suspicious of each other, prejudices began to break down. As the sun began to set, thousands sat cross-legged on the streets. The air was still warm from speeches and songs, but now silence took over. In the middle of the crowd, a young imam stood wearing a white robe and a blue turban. With a calm voice, he said, "Many of you may not know, but today we are fasting. And like you, we are also struggling, not with weapons, but with patience and prayer." Without any prompt, the crowd moved closer. They opened food packages, sharing bread, dates, water, and fruit. Thousands of non-Muslims sat on the ground, breaking their fast together with the Muslims they had only known through suspicious news stories. Photos of that moment spread like wildfire. A Jewish woman holding the hand of a Muslim man as the prayer began. A white veteran crying while eating a date for the first time from the hand of a Palestinian teenager. A police officer donating a box of pizza for the mass iftar, then sitting down to eat together. Previously, the word Islam in America was often paired with radicalism or terrorism. But that day, for the first time in the eyes of millions, Islam appeared as a peaceful embrace. A woman from Kentucky, wearing a t-shirt that read "Christian Moms for Peace," was interviewed by CNN. "I used to be afraid of mosques. Now my child plays soccer in the mosque yard every evening." The Muhammad Ali Mosque in Detroit opened its doors 24 hours, providing rest for exhausted protesters. Muslim doctors offered free medical services. Young students prepared meals for thousands. On the mosque's outer wall, a large banner read, "We may not share the same religion, but we share humanity." Conservative media tried to steer opinion. Beware, radical Islam is infiltrating the protests, but the people's voices were much louder. On social media, videos of interfaith togetherness were shared tens of millions of times. Loving comments replaced hatred. "I never understood Islam, but after sitting, eating, and crying with them, I began to understand what patience and peace really mean." Ryan, former U.S. soldier. In Arizona, a group tore down a racist billboard that read, "Stop Sharia law," and replaced it with a peace-themed mural showing hands of all skin colors clasped together. In New Orleans, a Protestant church announced it would rent its hall for Friday prayers because mosques were full. From the rubble of fear and propaganda emerged an undeniable truth. Islam is not the enemy. In the wave of protests rejecting needless death, Muslims in America stood at the forefront, not as religious symbols, but as representatives of conscience. And that night, as the Maghrib call to prayer echoed through the streets of Los Angeles, many bowed their heads, not because they converted to Islam, but because they finally understood. We are different, but we stand for the same thing, life. As the wave of peaceful protests shook the entire nation, an unexpected phenomenon began spreading like a virus. Thousands of demonstrators converting to Islam en masse. Hashtags #Islam brings peace and #Peace through faith suddenly trended on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. Short videos showing warm embraces between Muslim and non-Muslim protesters were turned into a larger narrative about a massive spiritual transformation. Within hours, dozens of influencers and public figures joined in spreading the news. A famous rapper posted a video of himself wearing a kufi and praising the peaceful values of Islam. A Hollywood actress shared her story of learning to pray amidst the peaceful protests. Thousands of comments flooded in, from supportive to skeptical and mocking. However, the reality on the streets was somewhat different. When journalists asked protesters directly, they responded cautiously. "We've learned a lot from our Muslim friends standing with us. But it's not about converting religions. It's about humanity." Alicia, University of Chicago student, an imam active in the peaceful protests, added, "We open our doors to anyone who wants to learn, but conversion is not our main goal. Peace and solidarity are the priority." CNN and BBC did special reports. The findings: there was a surge in interest in learning about Islam, especially among youth hungry for peace and meaning. However, the viral mass conversion claims were not significantly proven. Many people borrowed Islamic symbols as a sign of solidarity, not as a sign of religious conversion. Social media experts explained, in highly emotional situations like this, people want to find an inspiring victory story. Mass conversion becomes an easily accepted and viral narrative. Dr. Helen Murata, digital communication expert. However, some spread rumors to discredit this peaceful movement, especially groups threatened by the shift in public opinion. A Pew Research Center survey found interest in Islam as a religion increased by 20% among millennials in the 2 months following the protests. However, officially recorded conversions only increased by 2%, a normal figure in religious dynamics of a large country. The myth of mass conversion is not just a viral story. It reflects hopes, fears, and ongoing social shifts. People seek new meaning in a chaotic world, and they find peace in hands once seen as foreign. But most importantly, this movement unites one voice. We stand for life, not for religious labels. For years, the barricade between the people and security forces remained tightly guarded. They stood on opposing sides, the people demanding change and the police or soldiers carrying out orders. But in this massive protest shaking America, that line began to blur. In the midst of a peaceful demonstration, a group of young police officers sat on the sidewalk, removing their helmets and riot gear. They handed out bottles of water to exhausted protesters. "I'm not your enemy. I have a family too. Kids I want to protect," said one officer, his voice hoarse. The demonstrators responded with quiet applause and heartfelt smiles. Several senior officers held a closed-door meeting after the latest intelligence report. An Iraq War veteran colonel said, "If our soldiers keep being sent to wars with no clear purpose, their morale will break. We have to listen to the people's voices." A young lieutenant added, "We are human too, sir. We want to go home to our families, not become political casualties." In New York, Vietnam War veteran Tom Reynolds appeared at the protest in uniform. He spoke with the police guarding the event. "I fought on the same battlefield as you, but this time we stand together. Don't let them force you to kill your own brothers." Those words moved many hearts, and some officers even shed tears. Videos of police hugging protesters, soldiers dialoguing with civilians, and veterans standing amidst crowds became powerful symbols that old divisions were beginning to be sewn back together by humanity. But not everyone agreed. Some commanders considered the young officers' actions a betrayal. A general harshly reprimanded his subordinates. "We can't be soft. War is an order, not a choice." However, the pressure from below grew stronger, and senior officials began to realize that the people's resistance was not just a legal issue but a moral one. Small but significant acts of solidarity between police and military happened in other cities. Police in Chicago organized peaceful dialogue sessions with protesters. Reserve soldiers in Texas sent an open letter to the government, calling for diplomatic negotiations. Military units in Virginia held social actions to assist communities affected by the conflict. The days when the people and security forces faced off with violent clashes began to fade. Now, voices calling for peace among those tasked with maintaining order grew louder. War was no longer just a battle between state and people. It was an inner struggle between duty and humanity. And here, a new hope was born. Change doesn't always have to come through violence, but through mutual understanding. As the streets of America thundered with the voices of people rejecting war, the world could no longer look away. This wave of peaceful protests spread across continents, shaking the geopolitical stage. Hundreds of thousands gathered at Place de la République, holding banners that read, "Stop War, from America to the world." French activists staged solidarity rallies echoing the voices of the American people. A student named Camille said, "If the American people, often called the world's police, reject war, it's a clear sign that the world is tired of conflict." Despite high political tension, civilians held joint prayers and peaceful demonstrations in several cities. They sent a direct message: "We want to live side by side, not kill each other." Videos of peaceful protests in the U.S. became an inspiration for many young Iranians. Amid uncertainty, some Israeli citizens also held anti-war demonstrations, demanding their government exercise restraint and seek diplomatic solutions. The European Union expressed support for diplomatic efforts and emphasized the importance of listening to the people's voices. Russia and China warned the U.S. not to repeat past mistakes of prolonged military interventions. The United Nations held a special session to discuss the increasingly tense situation in the Middle East and the wave of protests in the U.S. Reports from New York, Washington, and other cities were broadcast live, showing the power of ordinary people rejecting war and choosing peace. Talk shows worldwide invited experts to discuss the social and political impact. The American grassroots movement became a catalyst for new dialogues in many countries. Humanitarian and interfaith organizations began organizing international conferences aimed at strengthening cross-cultural solidarity. From American streets to world parliaments, one clear message resonated: peace is not utopia, but the real demand of the global people. The wave of peace that started in one country now echoes worldwide, proving that the united voice of the people can shake the foundations of power and carve a new history. The wave of protests that transformed America's face and shook the world has now reached its peak. From the streets to the halls of power, change became inevitable. President Trump, who had long been a symbol of controversy, finally announced a decision that shook the nation. After listening to the voice of the people, we will withdraw our troops and shift focus to diplomacy and peace-building. The speech was met with thunderous applause across the country. The demonstrators who had fought in the streets now saw the fruits of their struggle. Congress passed a new resolution rejecting military intervention in Iran and calling for intensified international dialogue. Some senators who had once been stubborn now acknowledged the power of the people's voice. Interfaith groups, once wary of each other, now sat together to form a national peace coalition. Muslims, Christians, Jews, and followers of other faiths pledged to maintain unity and prevent further conflict. Thousands gathered to celebrate not with grand festivities, but with joint prayers, reflection, and vows to uphold peace. A young man said, "We are no longer enemies. We are brothers and sisters choosing life and peace." News of America's transformation inspired similar movements worldwide. The world entered a new chapter where the people's voice became a real force shaping history. From crowds in the streets to the pinnacle of power, from fear to hope, this story is proof that When people unite and choose peace, the world changes.